got thrashed by a better team on the night. And this is what I meant earlier about I'm actually quite happy that we didn't go dark and really down into the depths of despair after losing on the weekend. And I think that says a lot about us, I think, as a country now, and the fact that we're okay to lose. And these guys, they know the pressure, or they thought they were walking back into New Zealand and going to be spat on and those sorts of things, which has happened previously. And you can understand. They're out there playing the game for the country. They lost. They're emotional.
I think it's great that they're showing emotion. I think it's an amazing thing that you're seeing now that you wouldn't have once seen. And it's okay, like Scott says, to be upset because it didn't work out how you wanted. I think that's great. I mean, I don't think you should look at the sort of New Zealand masculinity and say, oh no, showing too much emotion. You know, I think it's wonderful that role models like the All Blacks are saying, I'm sad about that. You know, that's not what we wanted. We gave it our best shot, you know, rather than being angry or being aggressive.
She'll be right, mate. Carry on. Smack on the shoulder.
You know, man up. You know, I mean, that there's no downside to that as far as I'm concerned.
And on a final note, there's quite a text here. The English shouldn't have crossed the halfway line for the haka. The All Blacks were respectful enough not to cross the halfway line for the entire rest of the game.
Yeah, but look at all the fines we've saved.
Oh, that's awesome.
Cheeky. Very, very funny text. So that's the text of the day. A big response to the tiny homes. I live in a tiny home completely off-grid. I read the Building Act, which states that if the building caravan is immobile and lived in long-term, is deemed as a house. This implies to me that it's one or the other. It's an interpretation of the wording of the Act. Now, on a final note, the Oxford University Union is to insist on the use of jazz hands instead of clapping at student events. Jazz hands is the British Sign Language expression of clapping, and the union hopes that by doing away with clapping and cheering, events will be more accessible to people suffering from anxiety, also those with hearing issues. Others call it rubbish, and that applause can unify. I don't often say this phrase, in fact, I've never used it ever, but is this PC gone mad?
I think it is the kind of debate that just sort of almost instantly gets just madly overblown. You know, instantly people, you know, Piers Morgan will write a column about it and, you know. But I also looked into it. I don't think they're insisting on it. I think they're just saying...
They're strongly endorsing it. That's right.
What I think should be outlawed.
Do you think that inclusivity should be applauded? Not applauded, but jazz-handed.
Look, I'm with you. I think it's a bit of PC gone mad. I think what should be outlawed is the out of time clap, and we're really good at that one in New Zealand. That's something we should be outlawing. Look, if it has a legitimate health reason behind it, and they can back it up under the science, then okay, fair enough. Let's have that debate. But it's...
I guess the thinking is that people who suffer from issues such as autism, you know, who might find it distressing, you know, I'm not actually necessarily endorsing it, but I'm saying we might have had the same conversation, say, a generation ago about, say, a creche or, you know, changing tables in a public
bathroom. So maybe the Oxford Union are ahead of the time. Maybe they're the future.
I just think if the worst thing we can say is...
They should be applauded.
That sounds like it's... That sounds like it's too kind and inclusive. Then maybe we
should send them a tiny house and give them a clap.
We should give them a clap.
Jeez, Wayne, what a show, eh? Gosh, Scott Campbell.
It's been magic.
Choice, eh? Joe McCarroll, thank you very much. Hey, Tim Watkin is on tomorrow and Monday. See you Tuesday.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, a young person has been charged with murder following the death of an 8-year-old Southland boy. The rural town of Ototo is reeling. Mike King's mental health charity refuses to stop a suicide study, even though it doesn't have ethical approval and could be doing harm. Principals say they're scraping the bottom of the barrel for teachers. Do the maths, we're more than 1,000 short. A petition has been launched to scrap a new police armed response team amid claims it's racist. 1,000 more e-scooters are destined for the streets of Auckland. We asked the council if that's a good idea. And a world champion skier swooshes home to finish the year at school.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. A young person has appeared in court charged with the murder of an 8-year-old in Ototo yesterday. The police were called to a home in the rural Southland town about 10:30 last night after being alerted by the child's family. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown was in the youth court in Invercargill for the accused's appearance.
A heavy police presence remains at a home in the settlement of Ototo. A nearby property, the home of the accused, is also under police guard. The boy stood silently between his lawyers in this afternoon's hearing in the youth court. He only broke his silence to briefly talk to the judge, Bernadette Farnan. The judge suppressed most of the details of the hearing, including the accused's name and age, and the name of the victim. The boy was remanded in custody and will next appear in the High Court next month. In Ototo, Timothy Brown.
Ill treatment of boys in social welfare homes in the 1970s and 80s has been outlined at the Royal Commission investigating abuse in care. One man who spent many years advocating on behalf of children gave examples of boys being beaten, humiliated and deprived of many rights. Dr. Oliver Sutherland says it was common for staff members to hold a boy down while corporal punishment was imposed.
One 11-year-old boy would not bend over after receiving 6 strokes on the buttock. 3 staff held him down while a 4th administered further strokes until he was severely bruised on the thighs, the buttocks and the jaw.
Dr. Sutherland says the military background of a lot of staff in social welfare homes was, in his view, the main reason for the violence. Secondary principals warned schools are hiring teachers they would not normally hire in order to cope with the staff shortage. The Education Ministry's latest forecast shows schools must find more than 1,000 extra teachers next year. It says many of the teachers will come from overseas recruitment programs. Richard Dykes from the Auckland Secondary Principals Association says that's a problem because New Zealand does not have the pay and conditions to attract the best teachers from other countries.
These teachers are paid better, got better conditions overseas, so we're not going to get the best coming from England or Canada or Australia or USA, and we've got to be really serious about that. I was talking to a Christchurch principal about 2 months ago, and his comment about many of the overseas teachers, not all, but many of them was that these are teachers of last resort.
Richard Dykes says principals are telling him the teacher shortage is leaving them with no choice. Twitter has decided to stop carrying all political advertising from the end of next month. In a series of tweets, its chief, Jack Dorsey, said political ads over the internet could affect the lives of millions by spreading unchecked fake information that was highly targeted and on an overwhelming scale. The BBC's Rory Keithlin-Jones reports.
Jack Dorsey goes through a whole series of reasons why he's worried about internet advertising in general. He says it's incredibly powerful, but the power brings significant risks to politics, where it can be used to influence votes to affect the lives of millions. He talks about machine learning-based optimization of messaging, that's using AI, artificial techniques to target people, micro-targeting, unchecked misleading information, deep fakes, fake videos, which are becoming more common. And he's worried about all of these techniques.
Social media rival Facebook recently ruled out a ban on political ads. The winner of the final seat on the Queenstown Lakes District Council has been decided by a coin toss. It took place this afternoon at the council offices in Queenstown, with the coin falling in the favour of Glyn Lewis. He applied for a recount earlier this month after he was pipped by AJ Mason by just 1 vote. Today, Judge Mark Callaghan ruled a vote for Mr Mason was incorrectly recorded and invalid, putting the 2 candidates level. Mr Lewis won the toss with heads to Mr Mason's tails. The Department of Conservation is hoping for more chicks for the country's rarest bird this summer, with a pair producing the first egg of the breeding season. There are fewer than 40 of the New Zealand Ferry tern, or taraiti, and only 2 chicks were fledged last year. A pair dubbed Mr and Mrs Red have laid an egg in Waipu, north of Auckland. A dog ranger, Isla Wiles, says the pair are experienced, have raised and fledged chicks in the past years.
It's looking quite good this season because we've got a couple of new young females into the population, which could mean more nests than last year. So we're feeling cautiously optimistic.
Isla Wiles says people should stay away from the beaches where birds are breeding: Papakanui Spit, Pakiri Beach and Waipu, and Mangawhai Sandspits. It's 5:05. Payback for losing to England in the Cricket World Cup final in July isn't motivating the Black Caps ahead of their T20 series against England. A boundary countback was needed to decide the match at Lord's in June after the scores were tied. Stand-in skipper Tim Southee says the Black Caps have moved on from the loss and only a few players involved in the T20 series played in that match.
It's a different format. We've had a tour to Sri Lanka. So, yeah, life goes on and I guess you move on, and what happened in England has happened, and, yeah, it's just time to crack on to another series and look forward to another World Cup in 12 months' time.
The 5-match series starts tomorrow in Christchurch. England have named an unchanged starting lineup for Saturday's Rugby World Cup final against South Africa, with the introduction of halfback Ben Spencer on the reserves bench, the only variation from the 23-strong squad that beat the All Blacks in the semi-final. Spencer only arrived in Japan on Monday as a replacement for former Crusaders halfback Willie Hines, who was ruled out because of injury. A second top 10 player will compete in the men's ASB tennis classic in Auckland, with world number 8 Karen Khachanov of Russia returning. The 23-year-old Russian, who has competed in Auckland twice, reached the quarterfinals at the French Open this year and has won 4 ATP Tour titles. The other top 10 player at the tournament is world number 4 Daniil Medvedev. That's the news.
The government signs off on dodgy building products.
Certifications have been issued that should not have been, and that poor certificates have the potential to compromise the safety and durability of buildings.
Fire services and flammable cladding is blamed for the Grenfell tragedy.
More people would have survived if the building had been evacuated sooner.
And a spike in shoe thefts in Hamilton.
So I've got a pair of Crocs at the front door and an old pair of English brogues, and they're absolutely safe.
Hit the ground running. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, engineer and academic Dr Volker Nock on his work to drill down into Cody dieback and myrtle rust. And after 10, Cambridge University politics professor David Runciman asks, what are the limits of power for presidents and prime ministers? Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine today, cloudy periods and isolated showers tomorrow, mainly in the west. Central High Country, fine today, cloud and a few showers tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairatapa, including Wellington, mainly fine, but a shower or two is possible tomorrow. Manawatu to Kapiti, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine, but showers possible about Banks Peninsula tonight. Bulla and Westland, fine spells and isolated showers. Otago, excluding Clutha, mostly fine but isolated showers clearing tonight. Southwesterly gales for coastal Dunedin easing tonight as well. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, showers possibly heavy until this evening, clearing about Clutha and mainland Southland tomorrow. Southwesterly gales about the coast easing overnight. Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy at times with hail. RNZ National, it's coming up to 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna. A Southland community is reeling after the death of an 8-year-old boy last night. Emergency services were called to a house in the rural town of Ototo about 10:30 after being alerted by family members. This afternoon, a youth appeared in court in Invercargill charged with murder. Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has more.
Police cordons remain in place around 2 properties in the quiet town of Ototo as police launch a homicide investigation into the death of a young boy. Ototo gallery owner Pamela Hopkins says the small rural community is the last place anyone expects something so tragic to occur.
One of the first things you notice when we moved to this wee town is, the kids are out on their bikes, they walk backwards and forwards to school without anybody accompanying them, which a lot of places in the world these days, they don't have that. They're always driven to school because they're on the main street. You see the kids walking up and down the street. You see them playing. They're out on their bikes. No, nothing anywhere near that. No, I mean, it's almost too shocking to behold.
The country town of Ototo is known as the heart of Western Southland and located about 40 minutes drive northwest of Invercargill. About 770 people live in the community, which residents describe as tight-knit and peaceful. Pamela Hopkins says a lot of tears will be shed in the wake of the child's death.
But we heard the siren go. I've also heard this morning police cars. You think, oh, well, it's probably a car accident, and even that makes your heart go slightly bump, but that's the kind of thing that you would expect it to be, of that sort of ilk perhaps, or fire or something. Certainly never in a million years, waking up this morning, did one expect to hear that, not in this town.
One Ototo resident, who asked to remain anonymous, says the community needs to support each other.
I just hope that, we can pull together as we have before with lesser tragedies, that people don't turn against each other, and that there is that support. And it's going to be a tough one to move on from, I think, but we need to be positive and focus on each other. And
she says it will be difficult to find a way through this tragedy.
How do you move on from something like this? I suppose we're about to find out, which is not something they would have thought would happen in Aotearoa. That's something that happens in those, other big horrible cities elsewhere. That's what we like to kid ourselves and think. There's no indication that something else would happen in Aotearoa.
Southland Area Commander Inspector Mike Bowman fronted media this afternoon to confirm one person had been arrested and charged with murder and was heading to youth court. Mr Bowman says the death was an isolated incident, with no one else being sought, but describes the investigation as still in its infancy. There's been no post-mortem yet, and forensic examinations are expected to take days, with officers from Dunedin providing additional support.
The two houses are undergoing forensic examination with the use of ESR, and we expect the houses will undergo at least 2 days examination and possibly proceed into the weekend.
Mr Bowman says there's also a police team working with victim support to look after those affected by the death.
They are linking into the family and also the tight-knit community, particularly the schools of the deceased, which is really important, as the children at school will be extremely traumatised losing a close friend.
The youth will next appear in the High Court in Invercargill next month. In Ototo, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
As Timothy said, police cordons remain in place at 2 homes in Ototo. One of those is the address listed as the accused home, but there is a heavy police presence at another nearby house. Timothy Brown is at the cordon and joins us now. Good evening, Tim. What can you see going on there at the moment?
Good evening, Lisa. There is still a really heavy police presence in place. I'd say at least a dozen police vehicles, though they are coming and going. There's a forensic tent on the front lawn of one of the houses on the street, and there are officers I presume officers, but probably also ESR staff, dressed in protective clothing, coming and going from the residence all the time. Shortly after I arrived on the scene, there was also a fire appliance, a fire truck, and what appeared to be a fire investigator's vehicle, though our inquiries to fire and emergency and police have drawn blanks on that. They won't comment on why they were here.
So what can you tell us about the accused's court appearance today?
It was a youth court appearance, so it was closed to most of the public. He had some family there and his defence lawyers. The details of most of the appearance were suppressed. However, we are able to say that the youth has appeared today and that he is charged with murder and that he will be appearing in the High Court at his next appearance, where I guess issues such as suppression can then be argued.
Thank you for that. That's Timothy Brown joining us there from nearby the scene of the alleged murder at Ototo. It is 13 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As always, we're keen for your feedback, so you can text us about anything you hear on the program today, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Yes, we could do harm. That admission from the psychiatrist in charge of the 100 Letters suicide study, which calls for people to submit suicide notes in the name of research. The study that aims to analyse suicide notes for themes is being carried out by the Key to Life charity, which is fronted by comedian, New Zealander of the Year and mental health advocate Mike King. But despite serious concerns the research could be putting lives in danger, the charity refuses to suspend it. The study doesn't have ethical approval, and following scores of complaints, the Ministry of Health has asked for it to be halted immediately until it meets all requirements. Psychiatrist Dr. Siale Foliaki is the chair of the Key to Life Charitable Trust. He says he accepts there is real risk to what they are doing, but argues there might be benefits too.
I think you should always be concerned about the potential of any activity within our community to trigger people that are close to the activity itself. So when I think about somebody that might have lost a loved one, and the fact that we'd like to learn something about events of, people taking their lives or attempting to take their lives. If we can learn something useful, and on balance, we think that the good we could do is greater than the potential harm, I think, from a personal perspective, I think we should move forward. But
so are you saying this is prepared? Are you saying that you're prepared to take the risk with this study?
I think we should seriously consider the validity of undertaking this work if the potential benefit does outweigh the potential to cause harm.
But have you done any analysis on that? Because, as you point out, the Health Ministry has raised concerns with you about this. So has your study gone before the Ethics Committee?
Yeah, look, at this stage, we still haven't made a full commitment to whether we turn this into a study of the type that you can publish in an academic sense.
So have you changed your minds about that, Doctor? Because on the 10th of September, the charity put out a press release. It said new study into end-of-life letters. The word study is repeatedly used there, and it says the study, the first of its kind in New Zealand, will look to find practical answers as to why so many New Zealanders are taking their lives. You already determined it was a study.
Yeah, look, and I think we need to rethink that position. I think it potentially still can be a study, but I think there's potentially a way to move forward that doesn't necessarily represent what our earlier public releases have stated. And I think that's an important thing to do, because I think this is a very sensitive issue.
So you think that there could be problems? You're backing away from it as a study?
I don't think we should back away from it. I think we should move towards it. I think that, we as a trust have to seriously consider the formed opinions of other people within our community, particularly, Crown agency like the Ministry. If they have concerns, we should take the concern very seriously.
So why haven't you responded to the letter that they sent to you expressing a long list of concerns about this study? Why has the Trust not responded?
I think there will be a response in time. I think it's one of those issues that does take consideration.
So by when will you get back to them? Because it's serious concerns that have been expressed that this study could trigger vulnerable people, it could cause copycat behaviours, and there's concern about the data that you are collecting. So serious issues. What's your timeline for getting back to them?
Look, I think, a full board meeting, we've got one left this calendar year, so it probably won't be prior to this calendar year completing, probably early in the new year.
Didn't you have a board meeting yesterday?
We did, and at that.
So why didn't you discuss it then and get a response for the ministry?
So we didn't get a response from the ministry because we didn't have a full representation of the board at our board meeting yesterday. And I do think that our opinion as to the way to go forward hasn't been completely decided just yet, but we certainly will get there.
Okay, so I just want to go through a list of things and I'd like you to give me some yes or no answers to these. So did you put this study before an ethics committee?
Not yet.
So no. Have you got a study protocol?
Yes.
Have you got a lead researcher, and who is that person?
So we've been in contact with a number of people, and at this moment in time we have not yet got a lead researcher, but we don't know whether or not we're going to follow this pathway. But
have you got a peer review protocol? All of these things are requirements of the type of study that you have said you are doing. So have you got a peer review protocol?
We would put one in place if we were going to move forward with the study.
But you don't have one, and you're already collecting letters. You're already collecting the research. How many letters have you got now?
They're in the hundreds now, and I couldn't tell you the exact number as of today. We received some more in the mail as of yesterday.
So can you see the fact that you have already hundreds of letters? You have already commenced the study, the research, yet you have not adhered to the guidelines for ethical research. Can you see how that's a problem?
I can see how that's a problem, absolutely.
So how are you going to correct it? Because they've asked you to stop collecting letters, haven't they? So have you stopped collecting letters as requested?
No, I think we've got a responsibility. If members of the community are still sending letters, then those letters have to be received and held in an appropriate, safe place.
So how are you storing that data, that information?
Under lock and key.
under lock and key. That's your security.
Absolutely.
So is none of it... some people can electronically submit information, can they not?
Yeah, that is my understanding. And
so how are you protecting that?
We've got some fairly tight security around our safety of our IT. And that's of a very high standard. I'm not overly concerned about that. My main concern is about ensuring that if we move forward with the study as it stands, that we do all the things that we should have done to get it to this point. But you're
already moving forward. You're already moving forward with this study, Doctor. You have got hundreds of letters that you have already collected, and the requirement is that for a study, ethical approval is required to prior to beginning the research, and the Ministry of Health says it cannot be given retrospectively. So
that's correct.
This is, by definition, an unethical research then, isn't it?
Well, I think there are two separate concepts. I think you're describing there's a proper process that you should go through to be given certification that you've gone through a process that says this is a safe and ethical project. Whereas, we feel as an organisation that yes, that should have been an important process that we followed, but it doesn't mean that our process and our project is unethical as it stands.
Why didn't you go through the process? Why didn't you do it properly?
Well, I think it's a really good question. I think that in retrospect, I think we might have done it differently.
Do you know why the charity didn't go through the process?
I think that it was an idea that had enormous merit in our minds. And I think when we, look at the concerns that agencies like the Ministry have pointed out to us, when I think about that, I think to myself, it's time to potentially check the process and see if there's a way that we can, from this moment forward, go forward in a way that is safe and considered and learn from having done the process potentially in a way that wasn't ideal.
Do you accept that this process could actually be unsafe as you are running it now?
Oh, look, I think that due consideration about the triggering effect that calling for these letters for people that are very close to a tragedy of the type that we talk about in terms of completed suicide, I absolutely accept that.
So you accept that you are involved in an unsafe process here. You're a psychiatrist.
Oh, yes, I am. And there's not a strong body of evidence that says that the process of asking for people to send us information of a very sensitive nature, that there is a strong body of evidence that says that is a dangerous thing to do. There isn't that body of evidence. But I, at a psychiatric, as an individual clinician and as a person that cares about this particular issue, I'm prepared to accept that, yes, that the process may not necessarily have been as well thought out as it could have been or should have been. I'm prepared to accept that.
That sounds a bit gung-ho when you're talking about people's lives here.
Gung-ho is a strong term. I don't think it's gung-ho, but I do think that, that somebody in my position should be prepared to sort of accept that it could have been done better. I need to be able to accept that. And I do want to accept that, and I do want to do something about the situation that does potentially reduce the potential harm that this process could have caused.
Okay,
and I want to do that.
So the thing that the Ministry of Health is suggesting that you could do is suspend this project now until you sort this out. Will you commit to suspending it?
What I will commit to is getting a board decision that's well informed and would take all the information and consider what we should do after a decision is made.
But you're saying that won't come until next year. So for several months, this was launched on 10th of September, you're prepared to take the risk that this research, this study could do harm. You're prepared to take that risk?
But I'm also prepared to consider whether or not this might do enormous good, Lisa. And so,
but it could still do harm, and that is the concern, isn't it, here? You could do harm.
Concern.
So are you prepared
we
to
could
take
do
the
harm.
risk you could do harm by waiting and not suspending this study while you come to a full board decision? Is that responsible?
I think we're talking about two different things now. I think there is a risk, and that risk is real. Yeah, and we need to make a decision as to how we move this thing forward. Yep, we should follow due process and allow that process to take place. I think, can I say to New Zealand public at this moment in time that we're definitively stopping the process? No, I can't say that because
Why
I can't
not?
represent the entire board. Because I think there's a process that should be followed.
If it was your choice, would you stop it right now until you get this sorted out?
Yeah, but that then applies to me as an individual, and this conversation is about me being in an interim role of being chair of our organisation, and there are other parties, there are other members of that organisation that I can't represent, so I can't answer the question the way that you've put it to me.
But you're a psychiatrist. Don't you have an undertaking to do no harm? So I'm asking you personally then, if you could suspend this, would you?
I feel like it could do enormous good as well. And so at this moment in time...
But doing good doesn't eliminate the harm that you may also do in the process. So I ask you again, don't you have an undertaking as a medical professional to do no harm? You have identified to me that there is a risk and you may be doing some harm. So personally, would you halt this if you could?
I think we could halt it if, I could certainly, put it to the board as of here and now, we should halt this. What I'm saying to you is that the process that we should follow, but you're asking me a slightly different question. You're asking me at a personal level, will this, should I stop it? As a psychiatrist, do I feel like I should stop it? And my response to you is this, that a lot of activities that occur in society carry a risk, and they also they carry the potential to do good. And so a lot of the decisions that we make are of that balance, of trying to balance up the risk versus the potential benefit. And at this moment in time, what I'm saying to you is that I think that there is potential benefit in this, and we just need to consider, what steps that we take to be able to potentially get that benefit and actually mitigate and manage the risk.
In the meantime, should people still send you letters?
Look, I think if there are New Zealanders that kind of believe in getting some valuable information out there into our community, if they believe in what we're doing, if they believe that what we're doing is potentially a beneficial thing, then at this moment in time, no, I don't think we should stop people from sending letters to us.
And that psychiatrist, Dr. Siale Foliake, who is the chair of the Key to Life Charity Trust. The chief executive of the Key to Life Charitable Trust, Mike Dawes, got in touch with Checkpoint in the last half hour. He says he will be making no comment about the 1,000 letters study until he's received legal advice. A Pacifica mother of two has helped launch a petition urging the police to scrap their armed response pilot, saying she's worried about her community's future if it becomes permanent. The unit's made up of blacked-out police SUVs and armed officers they've been put into the county's Manukau, Waikato and Canterbury area for 6 months. They were launched nearly 2 weeks ago, but now there's a push to force a rethink. Logan Church has the story.
News of the armed response police teams immediately raised red flags for Pacifica mother of two, Melissa Lama.
To put it in heavy populated Pacific community, Māori and Pacific communities, I'm really you couldn't be any more obvious, So to me, with two young boys, I'm very concerned and I'm very scared. And I don't want to have to carry that burden and that fear my mum carried, her parents carried in this country, to my boys, But I feel like that's what's going to happen.
Melissa Lama has helped launch a petition asking for the police minister to stop the trial and instead open a dialogue with the communities these teams will be operating in. Nearly 2,000 people have signed the online petition in the last 7 days. A source has told Checkpoints that police have admitted that the armed response teams haven't had the racial bias training needed to effectively police areas with diverse populations. County's Manukau district has a very high percentage of youth compared to other districts, for example, and the police say it's home to a multitude of ethnicities that require a provision that, quote, meets the specific needs of these groups. Melissa Lama says she's worried that racial bias is still present in policing, giving an example of a community event she's recently been involved in.
One thing I remember actually was the police presence that we had during the Mate Maatonga visit in Christchurch, the rugby league. And it was really a shame for me, actually, to remember that we had this at a local park in Hunhei rally. And so there's a lot of Pacific people who came to this community day. And some of the feedback we got was that actually were they there to police us in our cars and how we were walking across the street, or were they there to keep the community safe?
Ms Lama says there has been some great steps that have improved the relationship between police and Māori and Pacifica communities. But she says this pilot is a big step back, especially given that many still remember events like the dawn raids of the 1970s.
That was when, I guess, racism within the police was quite strong, unconscious bias was quite strong, and therefore they were policing pretty much anyone who was brown and pretty much looked like they could be an overstayer. And I guess some of the approaches and the way in which they implemented that type of policing was very unethical, very unfair and unjust. And it's actually the psychological and I guess the cycle of that damage, is carried on to today. And I remember, actually, this is a good prime example, I remember my parents, especially my mum, telling me that if you see a police officer, don't ever look at them.
And experts overseas think there are going to be serious problems with sending armed units routinely into neighbourhoods. Professor Jonathan Mumolo of Princeton University in the United States has extensively researched the pros and cons of arming police.
I think what the evidence shows is that using these types of militarized units as a matter of routine can be problematic. They're not lowering crime, they're not keeping officers safer on average, and then the public perception that results from using militarized police is pretty negative in terms of what they think of law enforcement.
And he says the New Zealand police need to be very careful how they are used.
A theme across the U.S. when these sorts of units have been adopted is that they are adopted on the message that they're going to be used for emergency situations. And then they end up getting used routinely. And so I think that's, something I would caution police agencies to think about. Are you really just reserving this for emergencies? And have you thought through the consequences in terms of how people perceive the police if you start to use them more routinely?
Melissa Lama hopes her petition will get the government and police to rethink things and come up with other options. The police refused our interview request today, but said in a statement they are aware that some people may have concerns about the deployment of armed response teams. They did not comment on any concerns being raised about the lack of bias training. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, principals are hiring teachers they'd rather not in a desperate bid to plug shortages. Why Twitter's banning all political messages, and will Facebook follow suit? And the World Cup skiing champ who is now hitting the books, can you believe it, in Queenstown. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the show this evening. Maybe the 1,000 Letters campaign, should it be stopped? It doesn't have ethical approval for the study. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
A teenager has appeared in the youth court charged with the murder of an 8-year-old in the small Southland town. The police were called to a home in the rural settlement of Ototo late last night after being alerted by the child's family. The psychiatrist in charge of the 100 Letters suicide study, which calls for people to submit suicide notes in the name of research, has admitted it could do harm. The study is being carried out by the Key to Life charity, fronted by mental health activist Mike King. Siale Foliakum admitted to Checkpoint that the study could be doing harm. Poor treatment of boys in social welfare homes in the 1970s and 80s has been outlined at the Royal Commission investigating abuse in care. One man who spent many years advocating on behalf of children gave examples of boys being beaten, humiliated and deprived of many rights. Dr. Oliver Sutherland says it was common for staff members to hold a boy down while corporal punishment was imposed. Secondary principals are warning schools are hiring teachers they would not normally in order to cope with the staff shortage. Education Ministry forecasts show schools must find more than 1,000 extra teachers next year. Richard Dykes from the Auckland Secondary Principals Association says that's a problem because New Zealand does not have the pay and conditions to attract the best teachers from abroad. The winner of the final seat on the Queenstown Lakes District Council has been decided by a coin toss. Glenn Lewis applied for a recount earlier this month after he was pipped by AJ Mason by just one vote. Today, Judge Mark Callaghan ruled a vote for Mr Mason was incorrectly recorded and invalid, putting the two candidates level. Mr Lewis won the toss this afternoon with heads to Mr Mason's tails. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to business news with Nona Peltier. Nona, so ANZ, right, the bank, they're taking a bit of a dent with their profits. What's going on?
New Zealand's biggest bank, that's right. And their net profit, that's the bottom line that they have to report, it dropped 8% to $1.825 billion. So that's the drop.
Still big numbers, but a significant percentage drop.
True. But when you look at their cash bottom line, which is the one that they think is a better measure of their performance, it rose 2% to $1.93 billion. And that's because it reflected the sale of their stake in Paymark, which is like the FPOS company, and an insurance company that they had called OnePath. So overall, the company, their bottom line is, it's pretty weak for the bank. In past years, they've done better, obviously, so because they're down. And they described it as one of their most difficult and challenging years reputationally, which isn't surprising because we've had them in the news an awful lot this year for a number of reasons, not least of all their chief executive leaving under a cloud of concern over spending that wasn't authorized or whichever. So which way.
I seem to recall a wine and a wine cellar.
Yeah, that's right, a wine. And I think a limousine car, was it that?
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to Z then. This is the energy company, right? Largest fuel company. Also, downwards with the profits?
Really significantly. In this case, it's down 74%. Yeah, quite a lot. And of course, that's our biggest fuel retailer. And, they also do other things, wholesale too. And they own jet fuel. So, they took quite a hit this last financial year. But they had flagged it last month that they were going to have a pretty bad result. And certainly they delivered on that. However, the outlook, it wasn't too bad. I mean, the market didn't react terribly to it because it was what they'd forecast. So they'd already priced that in. The reason why is retail competition. It's really, really tough. That's what the company said. They also said that commercial was sluggish. So in August, we had a lot of wet weather. And so their diesel sales depend on bulldozers, that kind of equipment being used. So they thought, okay, well, it will perk up in September, but it didn't. And so that's causing them a little bit of worry. Yeah, so overall, they have an underlying profit. They have a number of ways of measuring profit. But their underlying full-year profit, I think the companies, we'll see what happens. They were a little bit unsure, I think, of economic conditions, but they certainly tied their downturn to that.
Interesting, the numbers given there. They're saying to you stiff competition there, and earlier we were told that all the petrol companies are taking big profits from consumers.
Yes, that's right. But it's interesting that Z Energy is saying that that might have been based on information the Commerce Commission had last year. But the situation over the last 4 months is certainly painting a different picture and suggesting that even some of the smaller retailers in parts have gone out of business. Because competition is so tight now.
Hey, what else has been happening on the markets today, Nona?
You know what? Kind of interesting stuff overseas because we had the U.S. Federal Reserve decide on interest rates and they cut them by 0.25%, and the market seemed to like that because they were still non-committal on where things are heading. So that was, in these days, not bad news, I suppose. So our own top 50 index, it fell just 2 points. To 10,788. And the New Zealand dollar perked up on that interest rate cut from the US dollar, 64.3 US cents, but it was otherwise really little changed against the Australian 92.8 cents and the British pence 49.7.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business wrap. Principals say they are scraping the bottom of the barrel and hiring teachers they would prefer not to in a desperate bid to fill classrooms for next year. The Education Ministry is forecasting a shortfall of more than 1,000 teachers, 860 primary teachers and 160 secondary teachers. That's despite attracting 2,000 more teachers this year and last year. But principals say they're not necessarily the teachers they want, and they're feeling the pressure as they recruit. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The government's confident it can help schools find the 1,000 teachers they need next year through a mix of overseas recruitment and encouraging people who've left teaching to return to the profession. It says there are already 800 more teachers ready to hire right now. But Richard Dykes from Auckland's Secondary Principals Association says qualified teachers are not the same as quality teachers, and the ongoing teacher shortage is forcing principals to lower the bar.
Definitely, I'm having conversations with principals who are saying exactly that. Yeah, they are employing teachers that they would not in ordinary circumstances want to employ, but they have no choice. You know, they're a month out from the start of the coming year. They're looking for a math teacher or a science teacher or even an English teacher. They've got no one of a suitable ability, so they have to look overseas, and they will just take someone who can fill that position. And that's the environment we're still in.
Richard Dykes says the ministry's forecast shows the real problem for secondary schools is yet to come.
Looking at the data they just released today, it shows a shortage in secondary of 160 in the coming year. It shows a shortage of around 2,000 teachers by 2025. Well, what are we doing about that? You know, that's only 5 years away. We need to get things in place right now to ensure there is no shortfall. 2,000 teachers in 5 years is not okay.
Primary schools face the biggest challenge next year. They have to find 860 more teachers. Heath McNeill from the Auckland Primary Principals Association is blaming the government for a large part of the shortfall because it's created more than 600 learning support coordinator jobs that schools now have to fill.
A lot of those teachers will come from the existing stock, and I know that a number of those positions in Auckland certainly have not been appointed yet. So once they get appointed, then the clock is ticking in terms of finding a replacement in time for 2020.
Heath McNeill says the shortfall is stressful and schools are looking overseas to fill the gap. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the coordinators will actually help teacher supply in the long term.
The addition of learning support coordinators has both a positive effect and a short-term supply impact. So it has a positive effect in the sense that it helps to reduce teacher workload, it helps to put more resource into the kids who most need that additional support. But then it also has a short-term effect on teacher supply, and that increases the demand.
Chris Hipkins is also defending foreign teachers being employed here. He says they've gone through a rigorous screening process and many are among the best teachers in any school. He says the total number of teachers has grown by about 2,000 over 2 years, well above previous rates of growth. Mo te hautaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The cruel treatment of boys in social welfare homes in the 1970s and 80s has been graphically outlined at the Royal Commission investigating abuse in state care. One man who spent many years advocating on behalf of children in care outlined examples of boys being beaten, humiliated and deprived of any rights, legal help or family support. Dr. Oliver Sutherland was giving evidence on day 3 of the Commission's inquiry. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been at the hearing in Auckland, and just a warning, some of the details in this report are confronting.
Dr. Sutherland worked with others to highlight the plight of children being held in custody, either by the police or in most cases by social welfare. He spoke about one boy held in a secure cell for 10 days in 1978 at the Owairaka Boys' Home in Auckland.
He was immediately placed in what the Department of Social Welfare terms secure care, which is in fact solitary confinement, in a cell about 3 metres by 2 metres. The only clothes he was allowed to wear was a t-shirt and football shorts. No underpants, no singlet, no socks, no shoes.
Dr. Sutherland says it only got worse.
Now, in those secure cells, all meals were taken in the cell, sitting on the bed beside his toilet. And the only time he mixed with the other boys was at physical training, PT. 3 times a day, which totalled 1 hour. And even then the boys were not permitted to talk to each other. So he was locked alone in his cell for 23 hours a day for 10 days.
The humiliation of the boys started from day 1.
On admission, every child had to strip in front of staff, get deloused, and then given the t-shirt and shorts.
Dr Sutherland says inevitably bedwetting was common among the traumatised children. He told the story of one boy who couldn't stop wetting his bed and how the system dealt with it.
So he had to wear an electrified cap arrangement attached to his penis. Even a drop of urine in the cap would trigger the sensors and gave me an electric shock. But one day they must have got fed up with me. The dial on the belt was meant to be set at a maximum of 3 for just a mild shock. But one night the dial was turned up to, say, 10 and I got a hell of a shock.
He says it was common for staff members to hold a boy down while corporal punishment was imposed.
One 11-year-old boy would not bend over after receiving 6 strokes on the buttock. 3 staff held him down while a 4th administered further strokes until he was severely bruised on the thighs, the buttocks and the jaw.
Dr Sutherland and his group Accord also had dealings with Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital. The hospital had an adolescent unit. Electroconvulsive treatment equipment was used as a punishment.
And I'll just describe what one boy said. The nurses used to put us all in the day room after school on Fridays. They called out the boys whose names were written on a bit of paper. They were the kids who had played up or been naughty. They were taken to the medical room and the electrodes were placed on either side of their knees. They were given a shock as punishment. We could hear them scream.
Oliver Sutherland says the abuse he witnessed compared to an inquiry into mistreatment of boys at a Catholic-run home in Stoke back in 1900. And that in the 1970s and 80s, nothing much had changed. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
It's 13 minutes away from 6 o'clock. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's head overseas now, and fewer people would have died in London's devastating Grenfell Tower fire if the fire brigade had told residents to evacuate earlier. That's the damning finding of the first report from an inquiry into the inferno, which killed 72 people. But survivors and relatives say they don't want firefighters to be used as scapegoats, arguing the first phase of the inquiry should have focused on the building's renovation and combustible cladding. Here's the ABC's Samantha Hawley.
For the relatives of the dead, the grief is still palpable. More than 2 years since 72 people died in the Grenfell Tower inferno, the first phase of an inquiry into the fire is complete. And it's scathing, finding more people could have been saved if it was not for the actions of the London Fire Brigade. It took almost 2 hours after the fire started in a fridge freezer on the 4th floor for the building to be evacuated. At the foot of the still-standing Grenfell Tower in London's west, Ahmed Shalit remembers the day he pleaded with his brother-in-law, his wife and 3 children to flee.
I was the last person talking to my sister-in-law, where she suggested that they're waiting for the fire brigade to come. They asked them to stay indoors. And I was begging my brother-in-law to come down.
That must be a terrible memory for you to have to live with.
It is a terrible tragedy. And we need answers, and we haven't got the answers yet.
The inquiry chair, retired Judge Martin Moore-Bick, slams the London Fire Brigade for systemic failings and serious shortcomings, while praising the bravery of individual firefighters. Tarek Gotti was one of the first responders to the fire and lost many friends.
How does today feel, I think, is the most important question.
Oh, well, I don't know what to say. It feels kind of sad, but also there's some answers questions haven't been answered properly.
The first part of the report is very damning on the London Fire Brigade.
Well, yeah, I feel sorry for them.
Do you? Why?
Me personally, I don't blame the firefighters. I blame their superiors, because also could have called different shots.
The report does find the cladding around the tower did not meet building regulations and demands similar dangerous combustible cladding be more quickly removed from more than 400 other high-rise buildings. But issues relating to the renovation of the tower won't be considered until the second phase of the inquiry next year. Yvette Williams is from the group Justice for Grenfell.
We need to look at, why we've got cladding, combustible cladding for sale. Why are we covering buildings that people live in? I think there's some huge issues around social housing.
The report urges the British Prime Minister to act quickly on the 46 recommendations, including to improve training for fire brigade staff. The London Fire Chief, Danny Cotton, defiant throughout, has refused to resign, but has apologised.
And London Fire Brigade are truly sorry we couldn't have saved everyone's life that night.
Too little, too late for the bereaved.
Samantha Hawley with that report. A new fire in Southern California is burning dangerously close to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. Wildfires are burning right across the state of California, where a state of emergency has been declared. But this newest blaze tripled in size in just 2 hours, aided by strong winds, very low humidity and drought. The BBC's Sophie Long reports.
Another day, another fire. California continues to burn. As the hot, dry weather delivers the fires forecasters feared it would. This time, the strong Santa Ana winds whipped flames through the Simi Valley. Among the buildings evacuated is the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, home to millions of historical documents and the resting place of the former president and First Lady. They're calling this the easy fire. Putting it out is proving anything but. And it's the wind that is their greatest enemy. It is ferocious here, with gusts of up to 70 miles an hour. It's propelled this fire through more than 1,000 acres in just a few hours.
The winds down south are going to be very serious. It's a very serious fire danger situation developing across Southern California. And I am concerned for, Southern Californians down there.
This is just one of many fires burning across California, where a state of emergency has been in place since Sunday. They are dangerous and they are disruptive. Hundreds of thousands of homes have been evacuated and many more are without power. Roads are closed, so too are schools and businesses. And the hot, dry conditions are expected to continue to combine with the strong Santa Ana winds for another 24 hours at least.
The BBC's Sophie Long reporting from Los Angeles. Twitter has announced it will ban all political advertising worldwide. The social media network's founder, Jack Dorsey, says the reach of political messages should be, quote, earned, not bought. Conway Gittins has the details.
Facebook has refused to ban or even fact-check political ads. But Twitter, in a stunning move, said it would go a different direction, banning all political ads from its platform. Twitter CEO and founder Jack Dorsey tweeting, quote, "We've made the decision to stop all political advertising on Twitter globally. We believe political message reach should be earned, not bought." Dorsey's announcement stands in stark contrast to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg's very public position that Facebook won't police political advertising, saying it's better to err on the side of greater expression.
Would we ban ads about healthcare or immigration or women's empowerment? And if you're not going to ban those, does it really make sense to give everyone else a voice in political debates except for the candidates themselves?
But his position was quickly challenged by critics, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Could I run ads targeting Republicans in primaries saying that they voted for the Green New Deal?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Would I be able to run advertisements on Facebook targeting Republicans in primaries saying that they voted for the Green New Deal? I mean, if you're not fact-checking political advertisements, I'm just trying to understand the bounds here. What's fair game?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Following the confrontation, a left-leaning political action committee called the Really Online Lefty League set out to test Facebook's political ad policies, posting an ad over the weekend that falsely claimed U.S. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham supported the Green New Deal. Facebook took down the ad, demonstrating that it will fact-check ads from political groups, but not politicians. Twitter is deciding it will no longer navigate that minefield, and in a series of tweets, Dorsey took a swipe at Zuckerberg. Quote, "It's not credible for us to say we're working hard to stop people from gaming our systems to spread misleading information, but if someone pays us to target and force people to see their political ad, well, they can say whatever they want." The ban goes into effect on November 22nd.
Conway Gittins reporting, and it's worth noting that Twitter is much smaller than Facebook. In February, it said it had 126 million daily active users, while Facebook recently boasted 1.63 billion. There's been no time for World Cup skiing champ Alice Robinson to celebrate her success. She's rushing home from the slopes of Austria to complete her final year of school. 17-year-old Robinson edged out Olympic champion Michaela Schifrin to win the World Cup giant slalom event in Solden at the weekend. Robinson's in her last year at Wakatipu High School and has to finish off a couple of history assignments before heading off to Colorado for the rest of the international ski season. She spoke to sports editor Stephen Hewson about her remarkable success and juggling the two worlds of professional skiing and school.
It's definitely been a bit of a whirlwind and super surreal, but no, I'm super excited and really happy it's the last week of school, which has been fun.
So talk us through that run or the couple of runs that you had to win the title in Austria. What was going through your mind?
First run I was just kind of wanting to ski as best I could and see where that put me, and I had a pretty solid run and it put me in second, just behind Michaela, so I kind of just reevaluated and just wanted to do the same thing second run and just clean up in a couple of spots and just go for it, and that's kind of what I did, and it was enough to beat just Nipper in the second run. Definitely kind of put me up there as a bit more of a challenger for this season, so it's really exciting, but it's still a long season, a lot more races to go, so hopefully just need to build on the consistency.
You finished second in a World Cup event last season. To win this opening event, how much of an improvement do you think you've made in that interim period?
Yeah, I think I've definitely made some big improvements, with my equipment setup, and then also just on my tactics and technique, and also confidence, and mental kind of thing. So I think I'm skiing probably just a bit better than I was last year, but also kind of have a bit more confidence in my skiing now. That's kind of, I think, the big difference.
You're also skiing slightly differently to some of the opposition, I see, when it comes to sort of on the edge of your skis and turning and rather than drifting. Are you able to talk us through that and what the difference is?
Yeah, I think I ski, kind of depends, my skiers, I ski quite aggressively, so I put a lot of power into my turns, and other skiers ski with a bit more touch. So, I'm kind of I'm a bit of a power skier, rather than a bit more touchy skiers. And I try and arc a lot of the turns, which some other people kind of slide. So, that's kind of a bit of a difference.
And how much adjustments it taken coming back to school? So what, you've got NCAA level
3 last year.
Yeah, so getting that out of the way must be the big focus for you.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty excited. Definitely it's kind of hard because I've got kind of skiing in my head all day, every day, and I'm trying to just kind of get those last few assignments done. But I'm trying to just get it out of the way, and then I'll be all done, which will be super exciting.
And what are you having to wrap up? What are your final assignments?
Just a couple of history internals.
And then obviously it's full-on skiing, is it?
Yeah, kind of from end of December. The next race is at end of December all the way through to March. It's pretty all go every weekend. So, it's really intense, but I'm super looking forward to it.
How do you cope with that intensity? I mean, what is it that flicks a switch in you?
I really like kind of the intense environment. I like that kind of whole situation. So I think I just try and embrace it and just have fun with it and just think this is really cool. And I don't know, I just kind of go with it.
And it's earned you, $70,000? That's not a bad start.
No, it's pretty good, isn't it?
What might you spend that on? Have you got anything in mind that is on the list of something you really want?
It's going towards my coaching fees.
Anything else? Even a treat for yourself?
Maybe, but I've got to cover all my costs first.
What's at the top of your treat list?
Oh, God. Maybe a holiday next year if I've got any time, but I've got everything kind of I need at the moment.
And would that be in the sun rather than the snow, would it?
Yeah, definitely in the sun, yeah.
And that's Queenstown skier Alice Robinson talking to sports editor Stephen Hewson. Let's get to some of your feedback before the 6 o'clock news on the 1,000 Letters study being conducted by Mike King's mental health charity. This person says whoever said the Ministry of Health was the best source of guidance for suicide understanding. They have had many of their own generated failings. It's time to learn from the past so we can protect the vulnerable of the future. That one's from Paul, not others. Everybody agrees though, this study doesn't have ethical approval. This person says your psychiatrist guest should be reminded about the activities of Dr. Herbert Green at National Women's Hospital. He thought that he was doing good despite his unethical processes. And this one, how is the suicide study note actually going to trigger people?
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Royal Commission looking into abuse in care has been told the treatment of children held in custody by the police and social welfare in the 1970s and 80s was racist and cruel. Dr. Oliver Sutherland spent a number of years advocating and helping children in state care. Andrew McRae reports.
More than 116,000 children were held in custody between 1967 and 1976, 41% of them Māori. Dr. Sutherland outlined barbaric practices in many social welfare homes, including solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, corporal punishment, humiliation and violence. He says much of it can be attributed to the military backgrounds of many of the staff. Dr. Sutherland compared what happened to a report into mistreatment of boys at a Catholic-run home in Nelson in 1900, saying nothing much had changed 75 years later. In Auckland, ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
A boy charged with the murder of an 8-year-old in Ototo has been remanded in custody and will appear in the High Court next month. The judge in the youth court suppressed most of the details of the hearing, including the accused name and age and the name of the victim. A heavy police presence remains in the rural Southland settlement with cordons around 2 properties. The Southland Area Commander, Inspector Mike Bowman, expects the forensic examination of the 2 houses will take at least 2 days. He says a police team is also working with victim support in the town.
They are linking into the family and also the tight-knit community, particularly the schools of the deceased, which is really important as the children at school will be extremely traumatised losing a close friend.
The Southland Area Commander, Inspector Mike Bowman. Schools feel they are being forced to hire teachers they would not otherwise in order to avoid a shortage of more than 1,000 staff next year. The Education Ministry has forecast primary schools will need 860 more teachers next year and secondary schools another 160. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The government says overseas recruitment and other measures have helped increase the total number of teachers by 2,000 in 2 years. Even so, it's forecast a shortfall next year and more overseas teachers will be needed. The Auckland Secondary Principals Association says that's a problem because many, though not all, foreign-trained teachers are regarded as teachers of last resort. It says more New Zealand-trained teachers are needed, especially as the shortage of secondary teachers is expected to get worse. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
National's Shane Reti is at odds with his leader over whether solo parents should be required to immunise their children to get a benefit. The idea was floated by the opposition party yesterday as part of its social welfare discussion document, and Simon Bridges was quick to endorse it. But just a month ago, Associate Health spokesperson Shane Reti said a no jab, no pay policy was intrusive and would hurt the poor. Dr Reti says it's not a problem that he and Mr Bridges disagree.
So no, it's not uncomfortable at all. It's a discussion document. It's not our final policy. We're putting out their various views and we're wanting to see what the people of New Zealand think as to how they might guide us to what would be good policy.
Shane Reti says the best way to boost vaccination rates is to give parents the best scientific evidence and information. The Government and Auckland Council have approved a hardship fund for businesses affected by work on the City Rail link. Businesses on Albert Street have been struggling to cope with disruptions caused by the construction, and some say they've been losing money. Jordan Bond has more.
The central city businesses have been calling for a hardship fund to be set up. The Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, says the government has approved, in principle, a fund to make ex gratia payments to businesses that meet certain criteria. The grants will go to businesses losing money because of delays in construction, and they'll need to open their books to show they were commercially viable before the work started. Mr Twyford says he's also asked the Ministry of Transport to investigate options for business support for other public transport projects. This is Jordan Bond.
The Hauraki District Council has elected its first ever Māori councillor. Rino Wilkinson of Ngai Tamatera has been welcomed as one of the newly elected councillors for Pairo Ward. Mr Wilkinson says he was shocked to find out he was the first Māori councillor. He's been given the portfolio of community recreation, which he says is right up his alley, but he says his biggest challenge will be working on a resolution to the Hauraki settlement, which has a number of overlapping claims.
I feel like sometimes maybe because I'm the first Māori to be elected into the council, I kind of got thrown under the bus. But, I want to connect to our people. I already have that connection to our people back home as well, and I want to be one of many of the voice pieces for our people in our iwi.
Rino Wilkinson says he also wants to get more Māori enrolled to vote. It's just past 6:05. The stand-in Black Caps skipper Tim Southey admits it will be odd coming up against former teammate Jeetan Patel when New Zealand play England in the opening T20 cricket match in Christchurch tomorrow. Patel, who played 24 tests and 43 one-dayers for New Zealand, is now England's spin bowling coach for the New Zealand tour.
They've obviously tapped into his knowledge in these conditions, and it is always funny when you come across guys you played a lot with, and now they're in the opposition. So, but yeah, I guess it's a way for him to get into his coaching side of things.
Kane Williamson is sitting out the 5-match T20 series with a hip injury. The Washington Nationals have beaten the Houston Astros 6-2 in the winner-takes-all Game 7 showdown to secure their maiden World Series baseball title. England have named an unchanged starting lineup for Saturday's Rugby World Cup final against South Africa, with the introduction of halfback Ben Spencer on the reserves bench, the only variation from the 23-strong squad that beat the All Blacks last week. Spencer only arrived in Japan on Monday as a replacement for former Crusaders halfback Willie Hines, who was ruled out because of injury. And in basketball, the struggling Breakers play the Cairns Taipans in Auckland tonight as they chase just their second win of the NBL competition. The Breakers have won just one of their first 4 games and will be without an injured forwards Rob Lowe and Finn Delaney. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our teenage correspondent Charlie Cuff has been thinking about those school climate rallies, along with some ways out of the looming crisis. Our Changing World finds out what happens when you give screen time to adolescent kaka. And because it's October 31st, Dr. Lorna Piatti-Finau presents a brief guide to Halloween, why the kids are knocking on your door tonight and what you might like to treat them with. So join me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Whanganui, including Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine tonight, cloudy periods and isolated showers tomorrow, mainly in the west. Central High Country, fine tonight, cloud and a few showers tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, including Wellington, mainly fine, but a shower or two is possible tomorrow. Manawatu to Kapiti, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine, showers possible about Banks Peninsula tonight. Bulla and Westland, fine spells and isolated showers. Otago, excluding Clutha, mostly fine, isolated showers clearing tonight. Southwesterly gales for coastal Dunedin, also easing tonight. Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, showers, possibly heavy until this evening, clearing about Clutha and mainland Southland tomorrow. Southwesterly gales about the coast, easing tonight. Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy at times, with hail. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And if you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The green light has finally been given to a hardship fund for businesses hurt by delays building Auckland's City Rail link. The $4.4 billion construction project is running behind schedule, and some businesses on Lower Albert Street say they've taken a massive hit because of it. And after months of meetings and protests, their calls for more help appear to have been answered. Sarah Robson has the story.
The government and Auckland Council announced today they are bringing forward work on setting up a hardship fund for the affected businesses. The Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, says he's given approval in principle for a fund to dish out ex gratia payments to businesses that meet certain eligibility criteria. The grants will only be paid to businesses negatively affected by the construction delays, and they'll have to open their books to prove they were commercially viable before the work started. Sonny Corshall, who owns the Shakespeare Tavern and has been acting as a spokesperson for the affected businesses, says they'd be happy to do that.
We are very much open. In fact, we had those documents ready initially when we were inviting the City Rail Link and Auckland Council and the government to talk to us and look, what effect it has done.
Sonny Corshall and the other affected business owners have long been calling for some sort of hardship relief, and today's announcement gives them some hope for the future.
2 years of these businesses crying out for help, they were really in a difficult time, even to open their doors day by day. They have gone through very hard times, including affected their health and the family lives.
But Sonny Corshall says they're waiting for more details to be announced. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff says there will be strict limits.
This is a capped fund. It will be targeted to businesses facing exceptional hardship, and it will be premised on that hardship being caused by the delay in the completion of the construction on the site beyond what was originally anticipated.
While the announcement has taken some time, Phil Goff says the government does have to tread carefully.
They know that there are potentially wider implications with the sheer amount of construction activity on transport routes right around the country. And in fact, this scheme is an ex gratia scheme that is ring-fenced around the delay.
Phil Twyford has asked the Ministry of Transport to investigate options for business support for other public transport projects. The Hardship Fund will be developed and managed by CRL Limited. In a statement, its chief executive, Sean Sweeney, said the budget for it will come from existing project costs. But Dr Sweeney says there is still a lot of work to be done before the fund can be implemented. That includes decisions on the size of the fund, how it will be managed, and who will qualify for support. Once that's done, a formal proposal and budget will be presented to the government and the council for sign-off. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Samoans are flocking to hospitals and clinics on Savaii and Upolu after news of 2 more measles-related deaths. The virus was last week suspected to have killed a 14-month-old toddler. And last night, the government announced an 8-month-old baby and a 37-year-old man had also died over recent days. Jenny Meyer reports.
The head of public health in Samoa, Dr Robert Thompson, says both the baby and adult who died were being treated in RPS hospital for respiratory complications. He says the number of people with measles symptoms is still rising rapidly in Samoa, with 314 suspected cases and 15 confirmed. It's mostly babies and preschoolers affected, and that's where vaccination efforts are being targeted. Dr Thompson says immunisation rates plummeted following the deaths of 2 babies in 2018 after their MMR vaccines were accidentally contaminated with anaesthetic.
And at this stage, we're just pushing for the immunisation of children, especially those below the age of 4 years. We have a big gap in our immunisation program, especially when the measles incident last year that cost the life of 2 children, and that had affected our immunisation coverage.
Dr Thompson says the government is vaccinating up to 400 people a day and has closed all creches, daycare facilities and early childhood centres in a move to protect preschoolers. A local journalist, Tipi Otongavai, says the government is considering a total nationwide school closure, but there are other considerations.
Because next month will be the national exams for Year 8, Year 12 and Year 13, they are looking at continue on having these students going to school until after their examination is done next month, and that will be it. And then there will be another decision for them to stay home until the end of the year.
Auckland University vaccine specialist Dr. Helen Pertussis-Harris says the vaccine offers immune protection from 1 day prior to exposure to the measles virus and to a lesser extent even after exposure. She warns this is just the start of the epidemic and blames the outbreak on a lack of leadership on the part of health authorities.
We've known about these problems for 20 years. So, where are you going to place the buck? We've had 20 years to do something about this. This is something we could have done a lot better on.
Samoa has asked New Zealand for medical supplies and also for nurses who are competent to vaccinate and have experience working with children. New Zealand's Associate Health Minister, Julian Genter, says the first consignment of supplies will arrive in Samoa on Saturday, and the government continues to offer further advice and practical assistance, remaining ready to help in any way. For Checkpoint, this is Jenny Meyer.
Meanwhile, back in New Zealand, National's Associate Health spokesperson Shane Reti is at odds with his leader over whether solo parents should be required to immunise their children in order to receive a benefit. The idea was floated by the opposition party yesterday as part of its social welfare discussion document, and Simon Bridges was quick to endorse it. Here he is yesterday speaking on Checkpoint.
There is no good reason to not immunise your child in 2019. Given that, if you're not going to do it, I say, well, you shouldn't be receiving taxpayer funding, or certainly as much of it.
So
because we
zero
want to see
benefit?
those children. We want to see those children immunised.
So you'd rather see them starve?
Well, the harm that comes from contracting measles, from potentially all the problems that go without that, the infection, as we've seen in Northland, that spreads into an epidemic. Those aren't things that I want to see in New Zealand.
But just a month ago, National Shane Reti, the party's associate health spokesperson, was dismissing the idea of a no jab, no pay policy, calling it intrusive and warning it would hugely increase inequity. Our deputy political editor, Craig McCulloch, spoke to Dr. Reti earlier today and asked him whether he stood by that position.
My view is that if we give the best information to parents, I believe parents will make the right decision. That would be my preferred method to increase the vaccination of children. Give parents the best scientific information, the best evidence, and I back parents. I believe they will do the right thing and our vaccination rates will improve.
In September, you're quoted as saying that the policy would be too intrusive and would disproportionately hurt the poor. Do you still think that?
I think there are parts of that. This is why it's a discussion document, because others may disagree with me. I come back to the key point that I also said then, that I back parents, that if there is good evidence put in front of parents, I continue to think they will make the right decision.
It's quite a different position from your leader, Simon Bridges, who yesterday said, if you don't want to vaccinate your child, here's the thing, don't take taxpayers' money.
It's not different at all, because it's a discussion document, and what it says is, let's have the discussion. Here's some positions that we can take on it. What do you think? Can you guide us? What do the people of New Zealand think around this particular point?
Is it uncomfortable, though, an uncomfortable position to be so at odds with your leader?
Oh, no, not at all. And we've talked about it this morning and said, no, of course, this is totally consistent with the discussion document and with what we're wanting to get from the general public around this point. So, no, it's not uncomfortable at all. It's a discussion document. It's not our final policy. We're putting out there various views, and we're wanting to see what the people of New Zealand think as to how they might guide us to what would be good policy.
Did you speak with Simon Bridges this morning? Is that what you said?
We've had communications this morning, correct.
And what was the nature of that conversation?
It was exactly this. It was a great discussion document, really good work from the social services team. There's several points in there that have clearly raised interest with the public, and let's see what they say. Let's see what the people of New Zealand think.
Did you push back against him, though? Did you say, well, actually, I think that parents don't need this requirement, that parents can make up their own mind?
No, not at all. It was a broader discussion around the social services document and around the key points that had come out that had been picked up by media and the points that were of interest to everyone. It was sort of that.
What about in your experience as a GP? Do you think that a policy like this would assist doctors or make it more difficult?
Oh, that's an interesting question. In fact, I raised this with a group of doctors that I meet with every month. I raised exactly this point on Tuesday night. And 3 of them were actually dialing in from Australia, where they, of course, have this policy. And so I actually had this discussion with some of my colleagues. There were mixed views. Some have said, look, and they were working in really rural communities. In some of the communities I've worked in, has been effective, was their observation. And some of my other colleagues were saying, oh, I don't know, Shane, I feel awkward about it. There's something about being the patient advocate that's awkward about that sort of policy. So I got a mixed view from the group of doctors I was speaking with, and this point came up on Tuesday, actually.
So will you be making your position clear among the caucus?
Oh, we all have a very good, strong view in caucus. We're well listened. We put all our heads together, and all the collective talent and experience the caucus has got, we then take on board what we've heard from the New Zealand public and try and make the very best decision we can. So yes, I'll be one voice amongst 55 in caucus, expressing a view and my collective experience.
National MP Shane Vetty. It is 19 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Detectives in Europe are continuing to try to establish the exact route that 39 migrants took before they were found dead in the back of a lorry in southern England. Many of the 31 men and 8 women who were from Vietnam or China are believed to have spent time in France before travelling to Britain. The BBC's Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson has been finding out more.
This is the voice of someone we're calling Zhang to protect his identity. He arrived in the UK illegally last week from Zeebrugge and spoke to us via Facebook. He says he knew 12 of those thought to have died in the container found in Essex.
I left for the UK a day before the 39 people who died. There were 7 people in the lorry and it was not refrigerated, so breathing was fine. I came via Russia, Germany and France. I came to the UK to find a job, but I'm now in shock and I can't do anything.
The stories and photos of those thought to have died in the Channel crossing often lay a trail through France. Like Wen Van Hung, who was last seen leaving Marseille for Paris. His father told us he got a phone call from the organisers just after the lorry had arrived. They said his son would soon call him, after which the balance of £10,000 must be paid. No call came. Or Wen Ding Lung, who'd been working in a Paris restaurant. When I heard he was going to the UK, his father told us, I tried to stop him. Last week, doctors took blood samples from his relatives. France is a bottleneck in the smugglers' network. It's seen as a springboard to London. But while it's easy to get to France from Germany, Belgium or even Poland, it's much harder and more expensive to make it from here to the UK.
The boarding places change all the time. It's quicker if they find a truck that's going directly from Belgium or Germany, and they can avoid Paris. But only the richest can afford to go that way.
Thi Hiep Wen is France's leading expert on Vietnamese trafficking. Her report into the networks here quotes a Vietnamese smuggler arrested in France in 2012 who said the money went to a big boss in Paris. Is that still how things are run here?
They are not just in Paris, they are everywhere. There are bosses in every country in Europe, including in the UK. There are a lot of them around Paris. They change location all the time, but generally they are around the southern suburbs. Sometimes you get 40 people in an apartment. It's inhuman.
Hiep says more than half of those found dead last week are thought to be from one small area in Vietnam. They couldn't pay for the most expensive kind of crossing, she says. They didn't have that kind of money. They paid with their lives instead.
The BBC's Lucy Williamson. Qantas is playing down concerns about the safety of its planes after at least one of its Boeing 737s was found with a crack. Australia's Aircraft Engineers Union has called for Qantas to ground its entire 737 fleet, saying it's concerned the scale of the problem is unknown and it could lead to serious accidents. But Qantas says it would never operate a plane that is not safe. The concerns come after Boeing was criticised in the US for its role in 2 fatal plane crashes. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
Qantas says it's on top of the problem and the discovery of a crack in one of its Boeing 737s is under control. But the Engineers Union isn't satisfied.
These aircraft should be grounded until such time that Qantas can establish which aircraft are safe and which aircraft aren't.
Steve Pavinas is the Federal Secretary of the Australian Licensed Aircraft Engineers Association and claims a second plane found with a crack overnight means the situation is bigger than first thought.
It's now 2. They've found another one overnight, and we're unsure how many of these aircraft have been affected by this issue.
Faults in Boeing 737s have been a serious problem for some time. The US Federal Aviation Administration has asked airlines to check some of their Boeing 737 fleet for cracks after airlines in other countries found problems. Qantas has confirmed it's found a crack in one plane, but says it won't confirm any others until the urgent inspections are finished tomorrow. Steve Pavinas says Qantas needs to err on the side of caution.
The component that we're talking about here is called the pickle fork, which is in the landing gear bay. It is a primary structure which takes the load off the wing, and the Federal Airworthiness Authority in the United States have said about these aircraft that have the cracks that this issue could cause loss of control of the aircraft, and for that reason we think Qantas needs to establish which aircraft are cracked.
A Qantas spokeswoman says the existence of a crack in a pickle fork doesn't immediately compromise the safety of an aircraft. And the Civil Aviation Safety Authority is also playing down the concerns.
There's no evidence to suggest that the 737 fleet needs to be grounded at this point.
CASA spokesman Steve Gibson says Qantas is responding appropriately.
Qantas has in fact sped up that schedule, is doing the ones over 22,000 immediately, will be in fact finished tomorrow. So they're doing the inspections much more quickly than was originally envisaged.
It would be an enormous impost, I imagine, if Qantas did ever have to ground its entire 737 fleet. Are you confident that an airline would make that call should it be necessary?
The aviation safety system is very conservative when it comes to dealing with these issues. So this is a very conservative response to the issue.
The discovery of cracks in Australia comes as Boeing is under pressure in Washington to explain its part in 2 737 MAX crashes in the past 12 months, which killed 346 people.
Al Rowe reporting for the ABC. The Wellington ferry operator East by West has been fined nearly $400,000 for speeding in restricted areas and grounding, which significantly damaged the boat. The City Cat vessel was travelling close to a rocky shoreline at Karaka Bay when it grounded on a rock in April 2017. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
The ferry was travelling at 17 knots when it grounded, jolting passengers off their seats and leaving some with minor injuries. Maritime New Zealand said the speeding continued for 12 months after the accident. A maritime spokesperson, Michael Paul Abbott, says the company's skippers were regularly exceeding safe speeds close to land.
We are disappointed that it was systemic. We hope it sends a really clear message that the focus needs to be on the safety of the people.
He says the ferry suffered serious damage.
The vessel was travelling at 17 knots in a 5-knot area close to the rocky shoreline. The significant damage to the vessel and the fact that it was out of operation for a couple of weeks kind of lends to the fact you could tell the vessel hitting rocks from 17 knots. A number of different passengers were jolted from their seats.
East by West pleaded guilty to 2 health and safety charges for failing to ensure the safety of workers, passengers and others. At the Wellington District Court, it was fined $380,000 yesterday. East by West was not available for an interview. In a statement, it said the skipper was stood down while the company carried out its own investigation into the incident, assisted by external experts.
As a consequence of this review, East by West have made substantial changes to their oversight of the operations of the vessels and have put in place robust procedures to monitor the speed of the vessels and their proximity to shore.
East by West says it's implemented changes to its daily operating procedures to ensure the safety of passengers and crew, as well as other water users.
East by West have cooperated fully with Maritime New Zealand throughout their investigation and are disappointed that Maritime New Zealand have sought to charge the company.
The skipper of the City Cat pleaded guilty to a charge under the Maritime Transport Act for operating a ship in a manner causing unnecessary danger or risk to other people. That person was convicted and fined $1,688 last year. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, tēnei.
How long, on average, do you think it takes you to recognise a piece of music? A few seconds, maybe? Well, a new study has found that some people can do this in just a tenth of a second. A tenth of a second. The BBC's Richard Hamilton reports.
Many people take about this long to recognise a familiar piece of music, but for some of us, it takes about this long. That was about 300 milliseconds, or the time it takes a human eye to blink. And for some of us, it's even less, only 100 milliseconds. The research was carried out by scientists from the University College London Ear Institute, who wanted to find out just how quickly the brain responds to music. They knew it was fast, but were surprised by just how fast. To do this, the scientists measured pupil dilation in the eyes and electrical activity in the brain. Ulrich Pomper, who was part of the team, explains how they carried out the test.
We asked our subjects to provide a number of songs that they're very familiar with and also emotionally sort of attached to. And then we found songs that were sonically very similar, but that our subjects did not know. And then we chopped all the music up into very small snippets of under a second, so 750 milliseconds. And we randomized all of the snippets and played them back in random order to our subjects.
Although a tenth of a second is probably less than the time it takes to hear a full note, Ulrich Pomper says we tend to recognise the timbre of the music using an ancient part of the brain before the rational part of the brain kicks in to analyse the lyrics and so on. He says understanding how the brain recognises familiar tunes is useful for various music-based therapies, for example, treating patients with dementia. For them, music is still deeply embedded in their memories, despite the failure of other aspects of their memory system.
Richard Hamilton reporting for the BBC. Thanks for joining us. We got to go, but back tomorrow at the same time.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A man who spent years advocating for children has told the Royal Commission investigating abuse in care it was common for staff members in homes to hold boys down while corporate punishment was imposed. A boy charged with the murder of an 8-year-old in Ototo has been remanded in custody and will appear in court next month. And the Hauraki District Council has elected its first ever Māori councillor, Reno Wilkinson of Ngai Tamatira. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
You very rarely get anybody getting up in public who's basically showing fortitude or arguing